Hey guys, so what's been happening over this week? Well, I thought we'd have a bit of a chat on classic color schemes. You know, sometimes the classics are best. And so I thought this would be a great topic for a discussion. And I thought while we do that, we may as well paint up something that I've wanted to paint for a while, but never done. You know, in all the years I've been in the hobby, I've always admired the color scheme. Big shocker, it's a black color scheme. And I've always liked it. And that is, this is a battle, the Adeptus Sororita, or whatever they're called these days, but Sisters of Battle, and it's the black one, so the black color scheme with the red and the bone and the white and that sort of thing. I think it's a really cool one, and I think this is called a Palantine or Palantine or whatever, the lieutenant, I think, in the Sisters of Battle army, and I think she's a pretty cool model, and I think that'll be a really cool one for us to have a go at and do it that classic scheme. So we'll be doing blue blacks and deep reds, and we may even get some freehand on the back here. I've been doing a little bit of freehand occasionally on these videos of late, so I thought maybe we might do that. We'll see how it goes with that. It's got a bit of a stitch down there which might be a bit problematic for a freehand detail, but we'll see how we go. But yeah, I thought this would be a really fun one to do, and I haven't done a Sister Battle on the channel, so that's really cool. And yeah, we'll just have a bit of a chat about classic schemes. And this channel's known, I guess, these days, well, I don't know if it's known for that or not, but people that have been following the channel for a while would notice that I do a lot of custom schemes, and I don't often do the GW classic scheme, or for whatever miniatures company it is, the scheme that's from that particular IP or brand. I often come up with my own schemes. So doing a classic scheme is kind of unusual for me on the channel, but I think it'll be good today because this one's definitely after my own heart. It's a black scheme, and that's really cool. So I'll stop waffling on now, and we'll get started on this one, eh? So, classic schemes. What do we mean by classic schemes? Well, I guess I'm referring to, the established color schemes of a faction, for whatever miniature game you're playing, right? So, if you're into 40k, then like this is the battle scheme, or that I'm doing now, or, if it's like Space Marines, that would be like Ultramarines, the blue and so on, or Blood Angels, the red, etc., Dark Angels, the green, the dark green, or Salamanders, light green, or mid-tone green, all that sort of thing. And each faction has its like predominant scheme or main scheme, and then a bunch of secondary schemes and so on. A lot that you can choose from, really, especially with something like 40k. But every game system has that. There's sort of a prescribed color scheme that goes with each faction, and that's sort of presented to you in the promotional photography and everything that you see, and that's what it is for my brand, Blood of Gods. If you go to the website, the link is down there. You'll see the Undying cult that I have for the STL files that are there on the website. They've got actually a very similar scheme to the one we're painting now. It's a black and dark red and bone and sort of brassy gold scheme, and that's what I present for that faction. So that's I guess what I mean by classic scheme is just the predominant one that's presented to you, and often they're usually thoughtfully designed for the minis so that they really give you the best view of that faction, or sort of accentuate the elements of that faction in some way. Often the colors do that, and that helps to sell it, right? To give you that sense of, I guess, going into the world that they're from. That's a really important aspect of this, because this is a fantasy hobby, a fantasy thing. You're stepping outside of the real world, and you're coming into this sort of creative space. It's not just the lore, the words that take you there and that sort of thing, or the design of the miniatures, but the colors that are presented to you. That also takes you to that place. A good example of that would be something like Trench Crusade. Whatever you think of Trench Crusade, it has a very strong color palette that sends you to a certain vibe or place for that setting. In this case, sort of like a World War I, World War II sort of, warfare sort of setting, although it has, a fantastical element to it and that sort of thing. It's giving you those colors, the browns and the khakis and all that sort of thing, and so you sort of get that sense of it, and that helps to tell the story, and that's that aspect of narrative, I guess, storytelling in that color scheme, and that's true of pretty much every classic scheme, and often is the thing that you think of when you think of if I say ultramarines, you instantly think of blue, a very specific shade of blue, in fact, ultramarine blue. And, that just comes up in your mind. If you've had any exposure to Space Marines or Warhammer 40,000, you'll know that. And that's almost a language, something that you learn. And so that can be a really great thing when you're getting into the hobby, or at any stage really, to go to those color schemes, because they're so synergistic with the faction that you're playing, and take, I guess, it helps to remove one of the difficulties when starting a project, right? Like, what do I paint it? What colors do I use? That sort of thing. Because often these companies and so on that present you this sort of color scheme will have a list of colors that you can use for it. Whether they make the paints or not, they'll give you a list, and you'll be able to go and get those paints and then paint that scheme. And that's one of the really big benefits of going into a classic scheme. So this sort of thing reduces the mental load, and so that can be really helpful when you're starting a project. You don't have to think about that. That's one less thing, and you can get into just, painting the minis and that sort of thing of it, and, get your minis on the table so you can have a game or whatever you're doing. So that can be really a really great way to get into it. So there's some really great positives there to do with classic schemes that really help you along the way, just from a functional point of view of just being able to do this hobby, because it is a lot when you're starting out, especially at those early stages, trying to grapple your mind around all the different things that you need to be doing to get your minis painted and so on. There's so many steps and layers to this. It's also a fun journey, right? It's a fun adventure to learn about that and to slowly master those things as you go along, or at least improve on them to the point where you can complete the sort of the thing you have in your mind's eye, right? The fantasy that you have, and be able to represent that on these minis in some way, near enough, and show that, and that could be a classic scheme, and that's a great thing. There's a lot of satisfaction in that, and as I said, it ties to the lore, and so that scheme then tells that story, and that might really speak to you, and so you're that synergy between the lore, the scheme, and yourself and the army that you're creating with that paint scheme suddenly all ties together, and that can be a really, really satisfying thing for people. It's one of the big draws to this sort of hobby, is that sort of connection to narrative and to the world that surrounds these miniatures. And I think that's really cool, and it's definitely I'm definitely pro that, even though as I alluded to in the start, I often do custom schemes on this channel, and we're going to talk about that now as to why maybe I might do that, or why I get into that, but also not that it's necessarily an adversarial or counterpoint to classic schemes, but sort of cross-pollinates or is in sympathy with classic schemes, and I think that's a sort of an interesting point to go down. So, in the early days, I've painted many armies with classic schemes. But, at some point in your painting journey, you tend to want to explore, techniques and colors and so on. And so that often leads you to, a unique scheme. And one of those things, we've talked about this on the channel before, is, it's a way to personalize your miniatures. And so, you may not have enough money to go and convert, your Space Marine captain or whatever, or whatever it might be. But you can give it a different color, and that can be a way of personalizing it. And so you're not really doing that out of some sort of, I guess, oppositional point of view to the classic scheme, although you could be, but in this case for me it's not. It's more of a case of personalization, that I want to try those things out, but it's in counterpoint to that. So you're looking at the scheme that is the classic and might be something really cool, and you're trying to think about what's cool about that and how you could change out certain colors to arrive at an equally cool scheme that might be unique to yourself. So it's still echoing the classic, right? It's still trying to tie together that lore and that narrative to that faction, but now with a slight tweak. And you see this a lot even with I guess lore accurate chapters of Space Marines that come from a main chapter, so like second founding chapters and so on in the old lore. I don't know how it is now with Primaris, but you would have you would have, you know, these sort of secondary chapters, right? You know, if you look back at the old lore of Space Marines, you've got, you know, tons of chapters. You know, it's not just Space Wolves. There's like tons of other ones, right? Or Dark Angels, etc. They have these you know, second and third founding chapters, which have their own name and a different color scheme, but often have something about the color scheme that is similar. So it might be like a metal color scheme, but you might have, in the case of, let's say, something like Dark Angels, you might have some of the green or the bone color, you know, quartered or halved, or maybe on the shoulder pads or on the helmets, etc. So there'll be an echo of that main scheme, but it'll have now a new set of colors added to it. And so you'll see that, or maybe a darker shade. In the case of something like Blood Angels, you've got Flesh Tearers, and they use a much deeper red, right, and black and so on, to sort of you know, differentiate them from Blood Angels. So, you know, you can go through that. And Space Marines is a good example of this because there's so many colors for them. And again, that's kind of like a classic scheme. So even though you know, Games Workshop kind of adopts the idea of custom schemes and actually incorporates it into the lore of these things, so that you sort of have options. You don't have to do the main color, and that's a really interesting thing too. So a lot of companies do that. They'll give you lots of alternative color schemes, which in themselves are a custom scheme or an alternative, but also a classic, because they're part of the lore. They'll have a name, they'll have their whole background, they'll be part of that world. So they won't be like truly custom, but they are definitely a divergent scheme to the one that's presented to you, the main one. So that's a really interesting thing. But always there's that echo there of you know, you're in a conversation with those classics, and that's a really cool thing. So whichever way you go on this, you do end up in that conversation. You can't totally separate yourself from it, because, you know, it's being done within the context of a game, of a particular you know, setting, and that's where you're always going to be living when you're doing this, unless you're using the miniatures of something totally different. But if you're in the setting that the game's part of, you know, you're playing the game, etc., then the scheme is going to have that relationship, and that's a really cool aspect to this. So one of the other great, I guess, pros of the classic scheme is that it ties you to a community of people, other hobbyists, right? You know, because they'll also be doing that classic scheme, a lot of them, and you have instant recognition with those people, right? You start developing these tribal groups, you know, within the game, you know, who thinks their faction is best and that sort of thing, and a lot of sort of lore accurate people that want things to be painted exactly a certain way or with the right details, etc. And people get into all kinds of obsessions over how these little men should be painted, right? Depending on, you know, whatever the faction is, etc. And some factions are more rigid with their color schemes than others. And this is actually quite separate from maybe what the company would want for the game or anything else like that. Games Workshop has gone through many generations of being really flexible with color schemes, being really rigid with them, and these days they're pretty flexible on the whole, on the most part, with it. But you know, in previous generations they haven't been. They've wanted you to be lore accurate and that sort of thing. But I'm not really talking about that sort of rigidity to it. I mean more the natural one that comes from the hobbyists ourselves, right? The community, and how we kind of adhere to it ourselves. We sort of create our own lore, I guess, our own sort of set of rules that come with how we paint them and all that sort of thing, and the fun differences that come up with that. You know, when you see another friend with the same faction as you, and the sort of the deviations they've done on their classic scheme, let's say, to you, and how important that is, and all the cool little details that they might have thought of that you didn't, or that you thought of and they didn't, and you can see all those kind of fun things. And then, you know, that sparks up a conversation about how you painted them, etc. And, you know, you get all those connections, and that's really fun. That's a really fun part of this hobby, is that interaction with each of our creativity sort of output, you know, on these models, and how they're presented to each other. You know, when you go to a tournament or a convention or somewhere where you've got minis, or to your mate's place, or to a hobby store, or wherever it might be, a club, and you get a chance to, you know, get your minis out on the table, and then instantly you're in that conversation with another person, and they get to see what you've done. And you know, if it is a classic scheme, then there's going to be you know, instant recognition there for that, especially if there's someone else in that club or place that also does that. And I think that's one of the really great pros of it, right? It gives you instant connection. You know, you might not have anyone that you know that plays the game, but you go to the hobby store, hoping to maybe play a game on their games night or whatever it might be. And let's say you've got Ultramarines and you've painted them, meticulously to look like Ultramarines, and you've done all the things, and you open that case up and you get them out on the table. You're able to play your first or couple of games with other people. You finally get a chance to have a game, and then you instantly see that the person opposite you also has an Ultramarines army. Maybe they're playing something different this time against you, but they love Ultramarines, and they look at it and they go, wow, that's really amazing. And so you get into a whole conversation, and instantly you've made a friend, and that's great. Or they might absolutely despise Ultramarines, and again, you make a friend, because then you get to have great jokes about Ultramarines and Smurfs and so on, and all that sort of thing, and that can be a lot of fun too, right? And in both cases, you make a friend, and that's a really cool thing. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of pros to going with classic schemes. So you shouldn't be afraid of that if you're thinking about, how do I guess, push my creativity or so on, or with this hobby. There's many ways you can do that. And just because you're doing a classic scheme doesn't mean that you can't be really innovative or do something really interesting with it, even if you're using those colors. There's many ways to paint, blue, for instance. There's many ways to do all those sorts of colors. It's not just like, one way or one technique. There's an infinite number of ways you could approach it and get a really beautiful result. You put any two Ultramarines together that anyone's painted, and they'll look completely different from each other, even though they might be using the same GW Ultramarine blue color, but they'll be applied in very different ways, and you'll get totally different results. And that obviously there's skill level, etc., amount of experience that you've had painting and that sort of thing. But that's not the only thing that determines it. There's much more deeper micro elements that are going on to how you paint that come into play once you start getting to an experience point that can really change the outcome. And so you get a very wide variety, and that's one of the wonderful things. I guess that's a great thing about being human, right? Our creativity, we can explore it in so many ways, and you see it in the miniature hobby, and you see it on these classic schemes, and that's awesome. You go onto Instagram, you'll see a whole range of different Ultramarines that people have painted in all kinds of interesting ways that are super cool. Then you've got non-metallic metal, you've got all that sort of thing, so you can vary up the approach so drastically that can make Ultramarine seem like something totally new and fresh that you've never seen before. And that's a wonderful thing, even though it's got that familiarity of the classic scheme. So I think there's a lot of strengths to a classic scheme. So if you're thinking about it, maybe you've been watching my channel for a while and you're thinking about all these like custom schemes you might want to do, don't be afraid of the classics too. They have their place, and that might be the right thing for the project you're doing, although it might not. It depends on what you're doing and how you're feeling about it. And you let your creativity and your instincts guide you in that choice, and that should be how you do it, because that's the fun way to explore creativity, is to have that time for play. I've talked about this before on the channel in previous chats, the importance of play and that creative time to express those ideas before you really lock in on what the process is going to be, that sort of thing, so that once you lock into that, it becomes much easier for you to build up those processes and speed up and so on, so you can actually finish the work that you want to do. But there is a really important early time there in those early stages where you want that playful time to be able to look and see and get inspired by lots of different ideas before you really make your choices on what you think your army should be, or the miniature you're painting should be, or whatever it is, and then move forward after that. But yeah, so I think there's like a whole range of pros there. There's probably many more that I've missed out on here, but these are some of the main ones that I thought would be really cool. And I guess now we'll try to see if I can think of any cons to classic schemes, and that might be to do with maybe rigidity or maybe a closing off of ideas. Possibly there is a side where that could be a thing, so we'll talk about that now. So yeah, the main con I think might be to classic schemes could be that it could blinker you to other choices, right? Because you're sort of, maybe the people around you are all like, total hardcore Ultramarine fans, and you're like, have to do it this way, and they kind of gatekeep you a bit when you're playing and stuff, and so you feel kind of bad, and you want to make you could have that kind of, I guess, community pressure on you to adhere to a scheme, I guess, or the company that makes the product kind of forces you into that, maybe to their tournaments or that sort of thing. There might be something baked into the rules that says you have to paint it a certain way, that sort of stuff. So there could be some although that's not really down to the scheme, that's more to do with the company, but that sort of classic scheme idea might close your options a little bit. So there is that. I don't think that's a very big part of it, but I'm trying to come up with a con here that might be plausible, and I guess that could be, that you might shrink your options a little bit and not think of all the cool ways you could paint it. But that's really the main one, a sort of blinkering of it. I can't really think of anything else that would really block you from moving forward by choosing a classic scheme, except for that maybe other choices that might be better for you. Like, some factions in some games, their color scheme is highly complicated, right? So complication of the scheme might be a thing. So if you're new, let's say, I don't know, what's something complicated, like Cities of Sigmar, for instance, the new minis that have come out for them in Age of Sigmar. If you look at their main scheme, or a few of their main schemes, they're quite complicated models, and those schemes could be quite laborious to get through if you're new, right? So you want to be able to simplify that a bit. You might still use some of the same colors, but you probably want to simplify it because it's going to be very hard to paint those detailed models with such a complicated scheme. The new Chaos Dwarves, the Hellsmiths of Hashut, which you're going to see on the channel eventually. I'm a big Cow Warrior fan, or a bull fan, and yeah, so you're going to see a few Chaos Dwarfs on the channel, but they're quite detailed models, and I could imagine if you're starting out, trying to paint those in a classic scheme or one of the main faction schemes, it could be quite daunting. So that might be an issue too. The level of detail that a classic scheme might have. Now, if you're looking at something like Space Marines, I mean, they're a blank canvas, right? They're just literally almost one color or a couple of colors, and it's very easy to do that on big flat surfaces. So that's obviously a lot easier. But once you get into sort of fantasy miniatures and detailed miniatures, like something like Infinity, their models are highly detailed, and some of their schemes could be quite tricky if you're starting. So I think that comes down to level of experience. But I guess that's the other con maybe of some of the classic schemes of factions in different games, the complication of it. So yeah, that's probably the main cons, I would say. But ultimately, classic schemes are pretty cool, and I can't really see any major problems with it. They're really cool, and they're great to come back to. So that's why you see them, sprinkled in over the channel, because it is fun to reconnect with, the classic scheme of a faction that you like and that sort of thing, and really just dig into that. I love Nurgle, so even though I like doing different sorts of Nurgle colors and so on, you'll see some classic Nurgle stuff on the channel as we go along, just as I love classic undead colors and that sort of thing, and all the other different factions that I enjoy. You'll see those, like with the Orcs I've done recently, the classic red, the sort of Speed Freaks type of color scheme with the fire and the red armor and so on. That's something I've always loved, and so going back to that was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. So it becomes almost like a refresher model, or a refresher thing to do in between these sort of more elaborate, sort of custom scheme ideas. You go back to that because you can just enjoy the ride because you already know the pattern, right? You already know what's ahead of you, and you just get to enjoy that journey down that classic scheme, and it can be a lot of fun. Just like this Sister of Battle now, I'm sure I'm enjoying it, and it's going to be one of those pleasurable things. That's why I picked it, because I knew it would be a fun day of painting and enjoying a nice black scheme, as I like to do. So on that note, I think we'll close this one out, and we'll have a look at how I've gone and get my closing thoughts, and see how this Sister of Battle turned out. All right, let's go take a look. And there we go, one classic Sister of Battle all done. Let's take a look. So yeah, I mean, this is really cool, right? Like, I've wanted to do one of these for, I don't know, like, it must be more than 20 years or something. I don't know, however long it's been, 15, 20 years, to do a classic Sister of Battle like this. It's pretty cool. So yeah, I'm really happy to have done this and get the little bits of, freehand on there and that sort of thing. I think it really lifts it a lot. So yeah, it's a cool pose as well. It gives you those little spots to put those freehand sections on. So that's really cool. But I hope you've enjoyed this, and just chatting about classic schemes and getting into that and enjoying enjoying it for a day. That's pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, maybe we'll do some more of this as a battle. If people like it, I'll do a few more videos on this kind of scheme, and maybe try some of the other minis in the range, and maybe some of the bigger ones, whatever, and have a go at it. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this one, that's for sure. So yeah, and I'll leave a nice image for this one at the end, as I normally do in the paint list. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe, it really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.